Hi, everyone. My name's Janie, and my project partner Tim and I are going to be sharing our thoughts on how we should define and measure poverty. So, first up, our argument. We first want to just go ahead and define poverty as living below the level of a shared understanding of human well being that suits one's human dignity. Now, this is very vague, so this is why we have to measure it and look at a multitude of different factors. So in order to measure poverty, to then figure out who is in need of help in our society, we think poverty should be measured by combining strategies from the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or the MPI, and the Supplemental Poverty Measure, which is the SPM, both of which we've learned about in class and talked about. This method would allow for examination of income, and that would include non-cash government assistance, which we think is important to the full picture, and important quality of life and deprivation indicators. So we've got categories in health, education, and standard of living. All of these things we think are really important for getting a full picture of who is in poverty and who is not. Okay, so first, for our subtopics, we wanted to talk about what's coming into the household. And yes, that's income, but like we mentioned earlier, it's also non-cash government assistance and benefits. So this is where we think the SPM is really beneficial. What the SPM does is that it also subtracts money used for medical and childcare expenses and then taxes as well, which the OPM does not do. It also adds money for tax credits if applicable. And what a tax credit is and why it's important is that if your income is not enough to which you're going to be taxed on it, then you actually receive money instead of having to pay those taxes. And so all of these things, the medical expenses, childcare expenses, the non-cash government assistance, which that refers to things like SNAP, so food assistance, stuff like that. This all helps us just get a more accurate representation of what's actually coming into the home. And the OPM, as we said, does not take into account taxes or non-cash government assistance. And this is all important because we're so focused on purchasing power. And why is that? Because when we think about poverty, we're not actually worried about what's in people's pockets. We're worried about what they can then do with that. So can they buy food? Can they buy everything they need for their house? Because we're really caring about quality of life. So these things like food, clothing, shelter, utilities, technology, internet, income is how they get all these things. Income and then these benefits and tax credits and all that to then meet their needs to have a dignified life. Okay, next we want to talk about standard of living. So since we're using the MPI, their system has deprivation indicators that then we talked about there's one for health, education, and then standard of living. So these would include, does the household have access to clean drinking water? How far away is that water? Is someone at risk when they have to go get it? Or is it just right in the home? Do they have electricity? What's their sanitation system? So this refers to the restroom. So that's important, and that leads back to health as well. Do they have adequate housing? What's the condition of their housing? All these things, helping us figure out where a family is. And then because we're combining the MPI with the SPM actually adjusts for non-traditional families and household compositions. So cohabitors, foster children, etc., unrelated children that are living in the home. So that would be like foster children or just people that aren't in your direct family. So they would be excluded from the OPM universe, but included in the SPM universe. That's a quote from the Schreider reading that we did. It also adjusts for the geographical differences because obviously we know standards of living vary country to country. They vary region to region, city to rural, anything like that. We know that the standards of living are different in Manhattan than they are in a small town in Virginia. And so the SPM does a good job of adjusting for that. They're also adjusted for 3 housing tenure groups. So whether you're renting, whether you own your home or you have a mortgage. And so when we look at all of those things that the SPM accounts for, combined with the physical, concrete, deprivation indicators and what state is the family living in, then we get a much more accurate and detailed picture of the daily life in a household, and thus what their actual quality of life is, so that we can decide whether they need government help or we need to change institutions, or what we need to do from there, and versus who does not need help. Okay, next what we want to talk about is health. So since we were just talking about standard of living, all of those deprivation factors from the MPI are very closely related to health. So all of those factors, when they're good, have instrumental value in then giving an individual or household health. And what the SPM does in terms of health, as we know, it factors in health benefits from the government and then healthcare costs. So we're getting the monetary side of things along with the actual physical indicators, which we'll talk about now. So with the MPI, the indicators that they use are child mortality and nutrition. So to break that down, if a child has died in the home in the last 5 years, and if anyone is underweight, both of those are, if those things are true, then a point is given in terms of deprivation, and they're more likely to be in poverty and be deprived in terms of the MPI. So while we know that obviously child mortality and nutrition are not the only two things that determine whether a household is healthy or not, they are good proxies and indicators of the overall health of the home. So you may have other health issues going on other than those two things that would affect your overall health, but those are just pretty good concrete things to look at that tell us more about the bigger picture. So by looking at these standards of living indicators, health indicators, combined with the SPM side, the monetary side, we're just getting, again, a more full picture of how healthy a household is and how much it's costing them versus how much the government is helping them with those costs. And then from there, we're able to determine if they need more help, if Medicaid needs to be updated and standards need to be changed, or if they are doing okay.
Hey everyone, Tim here. Thank you, Janie, for covering the SPM and the health and standard of living for the MPI. And so now I have more for you on why we are factoring in the MPI. So to start, there are a couple issues with the SPM where there are areas of our measurement of poverty in which it doesn't quite cover. So it is, in our opinions, it's too binary, and it doesn't really factor in any capabilities. And you often hear that the SPM is also not as useful because it focuses solely on income in terms of poverty, and money, obviously, to us is not everything when measuring poverty. And so transitioning into why we are using the MPI, well, we need a measurement of capabilities, but not quite like the capabilities approach that was brought to fame by Sen and later was elaborated on by Martha Nussbaum. So the MPI, while having a capabilities approach, also has a multidimensional approach, which, as mentioned earlier, covers access to education, household living standards, and household health. So Janie and I were doing some research on the MPI and its extensions past the capabilities approach, and we had a conversation with ChatGPT, and it actually said something super valuable to our argument. It said that, quote, the MPI is essentially an operationalization of the capabilities approach. It translates Sen's philosophical ideas into a concrete, measurable framework that can be used by governments and institutions to track and table poverty in a more human-centered way. So the MPI pretty much piggybacks off of the capabilities approach and supports Janie and I's conclusion of how we want to measure poverty, which, as Janie said before, it is not all about what is in your pockets. It's about what you can do with what's in your pocket. And so finally, the quote, the MPI is an annual international measure, according to the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. So another strength of the MPI is that it stretches across the globe and can measure internationally. And according to the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index from 2024, quote, of the 1.1 billion poor people, 962 million, which is 83.7%, live in rural areas. This rural-urban poverty disparity is stark worldwide, with 28% of the rural population living in poverty compared with just 6.6% in urban areas. The MPI completes our list in ways that poverty should be measured. It is valuable in multiple different areas when studying poverty, and the addition of this measurement to the SPM allows for a full range of accurate poverty measurements to be made. So next, we are also asked to include an analyzation of Robert Rector and his view on modern poverty, and sort of the strengths and weaknesses. So Rector forms his main argument off of a poll taken by the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, which asked how one would define being poor in the U.S. The majority of the answers focused on homelessness or hunger or lack of basic necessities. Rector's article critiques this by emphasizing that over time poverty has gradually improved. So this claim was backed up using RECS, R-E-C-S, data from 2005, analyzing access to amenities in poor households. Living conditions are analyzed based on the 30-item list of amenities. So a household score can range from 0 to 30 in terms of what you have access to. The amenities range from a refrigerator, which tends to be a high necessity, to a jacuzzi, which is not really necessary, especially for households in poverty. And so a quote from Rector's article, so poor households had a median household amenity score of 14. So the households with the median amenity score most frequently had items such as air conditioning, a clothes washer and dryer, cordless phones, and a coffee maker. Rector continues with his argument that, quote, census poverty reports are misleading and inaccurate. Rector breaks down the U.S. Census Bureau report that claims that over 35 million Americans live in poverty. In his mind, there are two flaws in the report. One, quote, the report provides no information on the actual living conditions of the persons identified as poor. It simply states that a specified number of persons are poor without giving any information on what poverty means in the real world. And two, the report massively, quote, undercounts the economic resources provided to poor people. It asserts that a household is poor if its money income falls below a specified threshold. He says that the bottom line is that the economic resources available to poor persons are vastly greater than the census claims. This is a very well-rounded argument in that Rector's claims are thoroughly backed up with specific evidence that the public can have a severe lack of understanding of the true poverty occurring in the modern economy. However, there can be arguments made contrasting said arguments. For one, possession of such amenities does not directly relate to financial stability or overall household well-being. So in the data used by Rector, there was no indication that every amenity in these households was fully functional or up to date. Secondly, there's no account for geographical conditions and costs of living. As Janie mentioned earlier, households might have less amenities in San Francisco, for example, because cost of living is so much higher than rural Alabama, for example. So finally, the study does not take into account access to education for children. So some might have other amenities for child development and might be using the technological amenities, for example, to help child education in the household. But the children could potentially be attending underfunded schools or even no schools at all. While Rector makes a valuable argument towards the modern measurements of poverty, there are too many variables in which he leaves out of his equation to take his conclusions into consideration, is what Janie and I have kind of analyzed and decided about Rector's article. So, to conclude, Janie and I firmly believe that the SPM and the MPI are very valuable strategies in the world's pursuit to measuring poverty to the best of our ability. So will there ever be one perfect method? We definitely don't know for sure as of right now, as there are countless philosophers, researchers, and educators that have various opinions on this worldwide issue. But this, for Janie and I, is the best way to go about it as of right now. And thank you guys for listening, and we hope you liked the video, and here are our final citations. Thank you.